The metal doors of the briefing room slid open with a soft hiss. Jake Morrison walked inside, his combat armor still covered in burn marks and dried blood. The mission had been long and brutal, but they had won. The colony world was safe and all the civilians had made it out alive. That was all that mattered to him. He moved to the center of the room where a large table stood. Around it sat several officers from different alien species. Each one represented their people in the Galactic Alliance. Humans were the newest members, having joined only 3 years ago. Some species welcomed them, others did not. Commander Velshaw sat at the head of the table. She was a Catharian, a species with silver skin and sharp features. Her people had been part of the Alliance for over 200 years. She looked at Jake with cold eyes that showed no warmth or respect. Jake's squad stood behind him. Corporal Amy Chen and Sergeant Lucas Kane had fought beside him for 2 years. They were tired, hungry, and wanted nothing more than to rest. But first came the debriefing. It was always required after every mission. Velsha activated the holographic display. Images from the battle filled the air above the table. The footage showed Jake and his team fighting through enemy lines. They moved fast and hit hard. When the enemy got too close, Jake had drawn his blade and fought hand to hand. It was brutal but effective. The Catharian commander watched the footage with disgust written across her face. She paused the image at a moment when Jake was engaged in close combat with 3 enemies at once. His blade was red. His armor was cracked, but he was winning. "This," Velsha said, her voice sharp and cutting, "is exactly what I expected from humans. Barbaric, primitive. You fight like animals, not soldiers." Jake said nothing. His jaw tightened, but he kept his eyes forward. Amy shifted behind him, her hands forming fists. Lucas took a step forward, ready to defend his commander. But Jake raised one hand slightly, telling them to stand down. Velsha continued, warming to her subject. "Your tactics show no sophistication, no elegance. You simply throw yourselves at the enemy and hope your brutality wins the day. Any species can do that. Even the beasts we fight show more intelligence." Other officers in the room looked uncomfortable. A Thorian engineer glanced away. A Zanari medic studied the table as if it held great interest. No one spoke up, but the tension in the room grew thick. "Humans," Velshaw said, standing now and walking around the table, "are barely better than the devourers we fight. You find honor in violence. You celebrate personal combat. These are the values of primitives, not civilized beings. Your admission to this alliance was a mistake." Jake's breathing remained steady. His face showed nothing. But those who knew him could see the slight tremor in his hands. Not from fear or anger, but from the effort it took to remain still. Velsha stopped directly in front of him. "Species that glorify killing, that find nobility in bloodshed, do not deserve respect. They deserve to be watched carefully and controlled. Perhaps humanity is too backwards to understand what real warfare requires." The room fell into absolute silence. Even the hum of the ship's engine seemed to fade away. Everyone waited to see what Jake would do. Amy and Lucas looked ready to explode with anger. Other officers seemed frozen, unsure whether to intervene or stay quiet. Jake Morrison looked at Velshaw for a long moment. His eyes were tired, so very tired. Then slowly and deliberately, he reached up and began unfastening his armor. The chest plate came off first. It hit the table with a loud clang that echoed through the room. Then the shoulder guards, then the arm pieces. Each one fell with a heavy metallic sound that made everyone jump. Velsha stepped back, confusion replacing her anger. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "I did not dismiss you, Commander Morrison." Jake did not answer. He continued removing his armor piece by piece. His weapon harness came next, the guns and grenades placed carefully on the growing pile. Then his tactical vest with all its equipment. His combat knife, which had saved his life countless times, joined the rest. His hands moved to his chest where medals hung. Bronze stars, silver crosses, citations for valor. He had earned each one in blood and fire. He removed them all and set them on top of the pile. Finally, he unpinned his rank insignia and placed them with the rest. "Answer me!" Velsha's voice rose. "What is the meaning of this behavior?" Jake stood there in his basic uniform, stripped of everything that marked him as a warrior. He looked smaller somehow, more human and less like the soldier who had walked in. For a moment, everyone thought he might speak. His mouth opened slightly. Amy leaned forward, hoping to hear his defense. But no words came. Jake simply turned away from Velshaw, away from the table, away from the pile of armor and weapons and medals. He walked toward the door with steady, measured steps. His back was straight. His head was high, but he said nothing at all. "You cannot just leave," Velsha shouted after him. "I am your superior officer. You will face discipline for this." Jake reached the door. It slid open before him. He paused for just a heartbeat, and some people thought he might turn around. He might explain. He might defend himself and his species and his way of fighting. But he did none of those things. He walked through the door and disappeared into the corridor beyond. The door closed behind him with a soft hiss. The briefing room erupted into chaos. Amy shouted at Velsha, calling her words cruel and ignorant. Lucas demanded an apology. Officers from other species began talking all at once, some supporting the Cathari, others questioning her judgment. But through it all, the pile of armor sat on the table like an accusation. The metals caught the light. The weapons lay silent. And somewhere in the ship, Jake Morrison walked alone, carrying nothing but his thoughts and the weight of words that cut deeper than any enemy blade ever could. Velsha stared at the door, her expression unreadable. She had expected anger. She had expected argument. She had expected the human to defend himself with violence, or at least with words. But this silent response, this quiet dignity in the face of insult, confused her more than anything else could have. In the days that would come, many would talk about what happened in that briefing room, but no one who was there would ever forget the sound of armor hitting the table, or the sight of a warrior walking away in complete silence. News spread through the celestial dawn like fire through dry grass. Within 2 hours, everyone aboard the massive warship knew what had happened in the briefing room. The story changed slightly with each telling, but the core remained the same. Commander Velsha had insulted humanity, and Jake Morrison had responded by walking away without a word. The human quarters became a fortress of anger. Soldiers gathered in small groups, their voices raised in fury. They wanted justice. They wanted an apology. Some wanted more than that. But their rage meant nothing if Jake himself would not speak. He sat alone in his small room, staring at his bare hands. These hands had held weapons, pulled wounded soldiers to safety, and signed letters to the families of the dead. Now they just rested in his lap, empty of purpose. Amy knocked on his door 3 times. Lucas brought him food that went cold and untouched. Other soldiers stopped by to offer support, but Jake remained silent to them all. Captain Ellen Wright, the senior human officer aboard the ship, requested an immediate meeting with Velsha. The Catharian commander agreed, though her expression showed annoyance rather than concern. They met in a private conference room with no one else present. "What you said today was not just wrong," Ellen began, keeping her voice level despite her anger. "It showed a fundamental misunderstanding of what humans are." Velsha crossed her arms. "I stated facts. Your people fight with emotion instead of logic. You engage in close combat when distance would be safer. Your tactics prioritize individual heroics over coordinated efficiency. These are not opinions, they are observations." "You observed actions without understanding reasons," Ellen replied. She pulled up Jake's service record on the display between them. "Jake Morrison has lost 47 soldiers under his command in 2 years. He knows each name. He has them tattooed on his body so he will never forget. Every dangerous mission he volunteers for is one that younger, less experienced soldiers do not have to take." Velsha glanced at the record, but seemed unmoved. "Sentiment does not win wars. He engages in close combat," Ellen continued, "because it draws enemy fire away from his squad. His casualty rates are 40% lower than average, despite accepting the most dangerous assignments. He is not barbaric. He is sacrificial. There is a difference." The Catharian commander was quiet for a moment, studying the data. Her expression shifted slightly, showing the first crack in her certainty. "I did not know these details." "You did not ask," Ellen said. "You saw what you expected to see, a primitive species playing at war. But we are not playing, Commander. We are dying so others can live. If that is barbaric to you, then perhaps we define civilization differently." Velsha stiffened at the implied criticism, but did not argue further. Ellen left the meeting without another word, knowing that some people could not be convinced with arguments. They had to see the truth for themselves. Meanwhile, word of the incident reached other species aboard the ship. A Thorian engineer named Crix sought out Captain Wright in the corridor. He was a massive being, nearly 8 feet tall with rocky skin and gentle eyes. "Captain," he said in his rumbling voice, "I must tell you something about Commander Morrison. 3 months ago, a bulkhead collapsed in engineering. It would have crushed 6 of my people." Jake was passing by off duty. He ran in and held the bulkhead up with his own strength until we could evacuate. He stood there for 6 hours. His armor was crushed. His bones were cracking under the weight. But he did not let go until everyone was safe. Ellen nodded, unsurprised. "Did you tell Commander Velshaw this?" Crix looked ashamed. "I did not think it was necessary. Everyone knows humans are strong, but now I understand she does not know humans are also kind." More stories emerged throughout the day. A Zanari medic named Lyra told how Jake had given his medical supplies to wounded aliens during a battle, knowing his own physiology could survive longer without treatment. A young officer from a species called the Vex recalled Jake spending hours teaching him combat techniques, showing patience and care that his own instructors never had. Even some Catharians came forward, though quietly and in private. They spoke of times when Jake had shown them respect despite receiving none in return, times when he had saved their lives without hesitation, never holding grudges or demanding gratitude. Admiral Gextil, the ship's commander and a Thorian with 300 years of military experience, called for Jake's complete service record. What he found astonished him: 83 combat missions, 32 commendations for valor, citations for actions that should have earned him far higher rank, but Jake had refused promotions twice because he wanted to stay with his squad. The Admiral read battle reports written by officers of 6 different species. All of them praised Jake's tactical mind, his ability to adapt to changing situations, and his absolute refusal to leave anyone behind. One report from a Catharian lieutenant described Jake as the finest warrior I have served beside, and the kindest soul I have met in uniform. Gextil sat back in his chair, thinking deeply. He had served in the Alliance military for longer than some species had known space travel. He had seen thousands of soldiers brave and cowardly, brilliant and foolish. But something about Jake Morrison's record stood out. The human never sought glory. He never wrote reports highlighting his own achievements. Every commendation had been initiated by others. Every medal had been earned while trying to save someone else. The Admiral sent a message to Captain Wright, requesting a private meeting. When she arrived, he gestured to the display showing Jake's record. "This man is exceptional. Why did Commander..." Velshaw not see this? Ellen chose her words carefully. Some people see what they fear rather than what is real. Humans are new to the Alliance. We are aggressive in combat. We seem emotional and unpredictable. For species that value control and tradition, we appear dangerous. "But Morrison walked away," Gextil said. When his entire species was insulted, he chose silence and peace. That is not the action of a dangerous primitive. "No," Ellen agreed. "It is the action of someone who has fought so much that he knows when not to fight." Words from Commander Velshaw could not hurt him as badly as other things he has endured, so he chose not to respond with anger. He chose dignity. The Admiral nodded slowly. "I wish to speak with him." "He is not speaking to anyone right now," Ellen said. "Not even his closest friends. Whatever Velshaw said touched something deep. He needs time." Gextil accepted this, though he looked troubled. "I have read the reports. I know what the Catharian commander said. But I do not understand why it hurt him so deeply. He must know her words were wrong." Ellen was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Jake has given everything to this alliance. He has bled for species he barely knew. He has lost friends protecting worlds he had never seen. And after all that sacrifice, someone told him it meant nothing, that he was just a barbarian playing soldier. For a man who measures his worth by how many people he can save, being told he has no worth is the deepest wound possible." The Admiral understood then. He had served long enough to recognize the burden carried by those who cared too much. Warriors like Jake Morrison did not fight because they loved violence. They fought because they loved everything else, and violence was the price required to protect it. Across the ship, Velsha sat in her own quarters, reviewing the mission footage again. This time she watched more carefully, looking past the surface brutality to the patterns beneath. She saw how Jake positioned himself between enemies and his squad, how he took wounds that would have killed others, drawing fire deliberately. How every movement, every choice was designed to protect rather than to destroy. She thought about his silence, his refusal to argue or defend himself. In Catharian culture, silence often indicated shame or guilt. But as she watched the human warrior on the screen, covered in blood but still standing, still fighting, still protecting, she began to wonder if perhaps human silence meant something different, something she did not yet understand. 3 days passed since Jake Morrison walked out of the briefing room. The human quarters remained tense. Soldiers went about their duties, but with less energy than before. Conversations were quieter. Laughter was rare. Their commander had been wounded, and they felt that wound themselves. Jake stayed in his room. He ate little and slept less. Amy and Lucas took turns sitting outside his door, not trying to speak to him anymore, just being present. Other squad members left small gifts by his door. A favorite meal, a book, a bottle of Earth whiskey that was worth more than a month's pay. Jake never acknowledged any of it, but the items disappeared, so they knew he saw them. Captain Ellen checked on him every evening. She would knock once, say, "It's me," and then sit with her back against his door for 10 minutes. She talked about nothing important. The weather simulation in the rec room, a funny incident in the mess hall, news from Earth. Jake never responded, but she kept coming anyway. On the morning of the 4th day, the alarm sounded throughout the ship. Red lights flashed in every corridor. All personnel were ordered to report to their stations immediately. The Celestial Dawn had received a distress call, and it was urgent. Admiral Gextel's voice came over the communication system, steady but serious. "We have a situation on Karis 3. A research station has been attacked by Devourer forces. 200 civilians are trapped inside, including 50 younglings. The station's shields are failing. They have less than 6 hours before complete collapse." In the main briefing room, officers gathered quickly. Maps and tactical displays filled the air. The research station appeared on screen, surrounded by red markers indicating enemy positions. The situation looked bad, very bad. "We need a rescue team," Gextel announced. "Small, fast, and capable. They will infiltrate the station, hold the Devourers back long enough for evacuation, and extract under heavy fire. I will not lie to you. The survival probability for the rescue team is 30% at best." Silence followed his words. Then one by one, hands went up. A Thorian security officer volunteered, a Zanari combat specialist, a Vex pilot, 2 Catharians, including one who served directly under Velsha. More followed. Within 2 minutes, 20 soldiers had volunteered for a mission that would likely kill them. Commander Velsha stood. "I will lead the mission," she announced. "This is my duty as tactical officer." Amy Chen stood as well, her face hard with determination. "The human contingent volunteers." Lucas Kane nodded beside her. "All of us. We're going." Gextel looked at the humans with respect. "I accept your offer. Select your team, Commander Velsha. You have 1 hour to prepare." The room began to empty as soldiers rushed to gear up. Ellen caught Amy's arm in the corridor. "Where is Jake?" Amy's expression tightened. "Still in his room." "He hasn't come out." "I don't think he even knows about the mission yet." Ellen nodded and headed toward the human quarters at a run. She found Lucas already there, pounding on Jake's door. "Commander? We've got civilians trapped. Kids, we need every hand." No response came from inside. Lucas hit the door again, harder. "Jake, I know you can hear me." "People are dying." Still nothing. Amy arrived and joined Lucas, both of them calling through the door. Other soldiers gathered, adding their voices. But Jake Morrison remained silent on the other side, just as he had been for 3 days. Ellen pushed through the crowd. She placed her hand on the door and spoke quietly, knowing Jake would hear despite the noise. "I'm not asking you to be a warrior, Jake. I'm asking you to be human." The corridor fell silent. Everyone waited, barely breathing. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then they heard movement inside. The door lock clicked. Jake stood there, and he looked terrible. His eyes were red. His face was pale. He looked like a man who had not slept in days because he had not. But his voice, when he finally spoke after 3 days of silence, was steady and clear. "Get me my armor!" The corridor erupted in motion. Soldiers ran to the armory. Amy and Lucas stayed with Jake, supporting him as he walked. His legs were weak from staying in his room, but his determination was absolute. Within 20 minutes, he stood in the hangar bay in full combat gear. But something was different. Jake had removed all his rank insignia, all unit patches, everything that identified him as an officer or showed his affiliation. He wore just the basic armor, weapons, and nothing else. He looked like any common soldier, anonymous and undecorated. He walked across the hangar toward where the rescue team was preparing. Velsha stood with her selected squad, checking equipment and reviewing the mission plan. She looked up as Jake approached and surprise crossed her face. "I'm going," Jake said simply. No explanation, no request for permission, just a statement of fact. Velsha's expression hardened. "I did not select you for this mission, Commander Morrison. Your presence is not required." "Those younglings need everyone who can fight," Jake replied, his voice quiet but firm. "I can fight." "You are not mentally fit for duty," Velsha countered. "You abandoned your post during a briefing. You have been unresponsive for 3 days. I cannot trust you in a combat situation." Jake looked at her directly for the first time since the incident. His eyes held no anger, no resentment, just a deep, bone-tired determination. "You called my people barbaric. Maybe you're right. Maybe we are primitive and brutal. But we know how to protect children. Let me do that at least." Velsha opened her mouth to refuse again, but Admiral Gextil's voice stopped her. "Commander Velsha, given the difficulty of this mission, we need every capable warrior. Morrison's record speaks for itself. He goes." The Catharian commander's jaw tightened, but she could not refuse a direct order from the Admiral. "Fine, but he follows my commands without question. Any deviation and he will face court-martial." "Understood," Jake said. He moved to the back of the group, taking a position where he would not have to interact with anyone. Amy and Lucas moved to flank him, showing their support without words. The rescue team boarded the assault shuttle, 12 warriors from 6 different species, each knowing they might not return. The humans sat together in the back. Jake between Amy and Lucas, his eyes closed, breathing slowly and steadily, preparing himself mentally for what was coming. Velsha reviewed the tactical plan one more time as the shuttle launched. "We insert here," she pointed to a map display. "Move through the main corridor to the civilian shelter, secure the evacuation route, and extract. Speed and precision are essential. Follow my orders exactly and we have a chance." The other soldiers nodded, checking their weapons and equipment. The shuttle ride would take 30 minutes. 30 minutes to think about the odds. 30 minutes to wonder if they would see another sunrise. 30 minutes to remember why they volunteered in the first place. Jake sat in silence, his hands resting on his rifle. Amy glanced at him several times, worried. He had barely spoken since emerging from his room. His face showed no emotion at all. He looked like a man who had already accepted his own death and was now just waiting for it to arrive. "Hey," Lucas whispered. "You good?" Jake was quiet for so long that Lucas thought he would not answer. Then, just as the shuttle began its descent toward Karis 3, Jake spoke. "There are 50 younglings down there, 50 children who want to go home to their families. That's all that matters now." Amy reached over and squeezed his shoulder. He did not pull away, which she took as a good sign. Whatever had been broken in him 3 days ago was not healed, but it was set aside, put away so he could do what needed to be done. The shuttle hit atmosphere and turbulence shook them all. Warning lights flashed. The pilot's voice came through their helmets. "Devourer anti-aircraft fire detected. This is going to be rough. Hold on." The shuttle dove and weaved, dodging enemy fire. Explosions burst around them. The whole craft shook violently, throwing soldiers against their restraints. Then they were through the worst of it, descending fast toward the station's landing platform. 30 seconds, the pilot announced. "Good luck down there." Velsha stood, gripping an overhead handle. "Remember the plan. Stay together, protect each other, and maybe we all go home." The shuttle touched down hard. The rear door dropped open with a hiss. Beyond it, the research station waited, surrounded by enemies and filled with civilians who were running out of time. The rescue team charged out into smoke and fire, knowing that everything was about to go very wrong. The research station was worse than intelligence had indicated. Much worse. The team moved through corridors filled with smoke and the sound of weapons fire. Walls were scorched black. Bodies of Devourer forces lay scattered, but so did bodies of station security personnel who had tried to fight back. Velsha led them forward with precision, following her tactical plan exactly. They moved in formation, covering each other's positions, checking corners before advancing. It was textbook military procedure, and it was failing. The Devourers were not following any pattern. They appeared from unexpected directions, attacked with no regard for their own survival, and seemed to adapt to every strategy the team tried. Within 5 minutes, the Zanari combat specialist took a hit and went down. The Thorian security officer dragged him to cover, but he was wounded badly and could not continue. "We need to adjust," one of the Catharian soldiers said, breathing hard. "They're not behaving like the intelligence report suggested." Velsha's expression showed frustration. She had planned for multiple scenarios, but reality was proving more chaotic than any simulation. "Maintain formation. Push forward. We must reach the civilian shelter." They advanced, fighting every step. The Devourers kept coming in waves, and casualties were mounting. Another soldier fell, then another. The team's defensive perimeter was shrinking. They were being overwhelmed. Jake had stayed in the back as ordered, following Velsha's commands without question, but his eyes tracked every movement, assessed every threat, calculated every angle. He saw what was happening. The careful planning was not working because war was not careful. It was chaos, and you could not control chaos. You could only adapt to it. A door to their left exploded outward. Devourers poured through, at least a dozen of them, directly into the team's flank. 2 more soldiers went down immediately. The formation broke apart as everyone scattered for cover. Velsha shouted orders, trying to re-establish control, but her voice was lost in the noise of combat. Jake moved before thinking. He broke from his position and charged directly into the center of the enemy group. It looked like suicide. Amy screamed his name. Lucas cursed and started to follow, but Jake was already in the thick of it, firing at point-blank range, moving with brutal efficiency. The Devourers focused on him immediately. He was the threat, the target, the one doing the most damage. They converged on his position, pulling away from the rest of the team. In doing so, they created an opening, a small window of opportunity. "Pull back!" Lucas shouted to the wounded soldiers. "Get them to cover!" The team moved, dragging their wounded behind a barricade. Jake held the center, drawing fire and attention. He took hits to his armor. Explosions knocked him sideways, but he stayed on his feet, kept fighting, kept pulling enemy focus away from everyone else. "Morrison!" Velsha's voice cut through the chaos. "Return to formation." "That is an order." Jake ignored her completely. He was fighting the way humans fought, the way she had called barbaric and animalistic. He was in close combat now, his rifle empty, his blade drawn. He moved through enemies like a force of nature, not elegant or sophisticated, just relentlessly effective. Amy and Lucas, seeing what he was doing, moved to support him without waiting for orders. The 3 humans formed a triangle, back to back to back, creating a defensive position that gave the rest of the team room to breathe and reorganize. Other soldiers, understanding the new dynamic, adapted to work with it rather than against it. The fighting was brutal and close. Jake took a blade across his arm. Lucas took a hit to his leg. Amy's armor cracked under repeated impacts. But they held their ground, and slowly, impossibly, they pushed the enemy back. They reached the civilian shelter 15 minutes behind schedule, and with half their original team either wounded or dead. The massive door to the shelter still held, but barely. Cracks showed in its surface. It would not last much longer. Velsha ordered it opened. Inside, 200 terrified civilians huddled together. Multiple species, multiple ages, all looking at their rescuers with desperate hope. The 50 younglings were kept in the center, protected by adults who had no weapons and no training but would have fought anyway to keep them safe. "Begin evacuation," Velsha commanded. "Priority to the wounded and the young. Move quickly but carefully." The evacuation started, but it was slow, too slow. The Devourers were regrouping outside. Their attacks came harder and faster. The defensive perimeter was barely holding. Jake could see the mathematics of it. They would not get everyone out in time. He moved to Velsha's position. "The evacuation route is too narrow. We need to widen our defensive line or the Devourers will cut us off." "I am aware of the situation," Velsha snapped. "Maintain your position." We cannot maintain it, Jake said flatly. There are too many enemies and too few of us. We need a new plan. The plan is fine. Execute it properly. Jake looked past her to the civilians still waiting to evacuate. So many of them. So many children. The numbers were not working out. The time was not enough. Something had to change or people would die here. Then the station shook violently. Alarms blared through the corridors. A voice over the emergency system announced what everyone feared. Warning. Core breach detected. Containment failure imminent. All personnel evacuate immediately. Velsha pulled up her tactical display with shaking hands. The numbers were clear and terrible. The station's power core was failing. When it went, the entire structure would explode. The evacuation was only 60% complete. 30 civilians had not made it out yet, including 20 younglings. She did the calculations in her head and her face went pale. They could not save everyone. There was not enough time. They would have to choose. Save those they could and leave the rest to die. Her finger moved toward the communication button to order the remaining soldiers to fall back. But before she could speak, Jake's hand covered hers, stopping her. She looked up at him in surprise. Get them out, he said quietly. It is not possible, Velsha replied, her voice breaking slightly. The numbers do not work. We have to leave now or everyone dies. You have to leave now, Jake corrected. He reached up and removed his helmet, looking at her with clear, calm eyes. I'll buy you time. You cannot hold them alone. It is suicide. 7 minutes, Jake said. That's all you need to finish the evacuation. I can give you 7 minutes. Velsha stared at him, understanding what he was offering. His life for theirs. A trade that made no tactical sense but perfect human sense. I cannot order you to do this. You're not ordering, Jake said. He turned and walked toward a small Catharian youngling who stood nearby, clinging to an adult's hand and crying. He knelt down eye level with the child and smiled gently. He removed his helmet completely and handed it to the youngling. Hold on to this for me, he told the child. Keep it safe. I'll come back for it soon. The youngling took the helmet with both small hands, nodding through tears. Jake stood and looked at his squad. Amy and Lucas moved toward him immediately, but he shook his head. No, you get these people out. That's an order. We're not leaving you, Amy said, her voice fierce. Someone has to make sure they get home, Jake replied. That's you. That's both of you. Get them home. He did not wait for them to argue further. He turned and walked back toward the corridor they had fought through, toward the sound of approaching enemies, toward certain death. But he walked with his head high and his steps steady, and everyone who saw him would remember it forever. The breach was a narrow point where 2 corridors met. Jake took position there, checking his ammunition and drawing his blade. Behind him, he could hear the evacuation continuing. Footsteps running, children crying, adults speaking words of comfort, the sounds of life trying to survive. Then the devourers came. They poured around the corner in a wave, dozens of them, and Jake Morrison stood alone to meet them. He fired his rifle until it was empty, dropped it, and drew his sidearm. When that ran dry, he pulled his blade and met them face to face. The battle that followed was recorded by the station's security cameras. Later, when military historians studied it, they would pause the footage again and again, trying to understand how one human held that position against impossible odds. They would analyze his movements, his tactics, his use of terrain, but none of them would fully capture what it meant. Jake fought for 7 minutes and 42 seconds. Every movement was designed to block the corridor, to prevent even one enemy from passing. He took wounds that should have dropped him and kept fighting. He used every weapon he could reach, including broken pieces of debris and his own armor when everything else failed. Behind him, the evacuation completed. The last civilian made it to the shuttle. Amy and Lucas reached the extraction point and turned back, seeing Jake still fighting in the distance. They started running toward him, ignoring orders, ignoring everything except the need to reach their friend. Velsha saw them go. For one moment, she stood frozen. Her tactical mind calculated their chances. 0. All 3 would die if they went back. But her tactical mind also could not comprehend what she was seeing. Humans who would rather die than leave one of their own behind. She made a decision that surprised her as much as anyone else. She ran after them. They reached Jake with 30 seconds to spare before the core would explode. He was still standing, barely, surrounded by destroyed enemies and covered in wounds that would have killed most beings twice over. His armor was shattered. His weapons were gone. But he still held the corridor, still blocking the path, still fighting with nothing but his bare hands and determination. When Jake saw them coming, his expression changed. The grim focus shifted to something like peace. He had bought enough time. The civilians were safe. That was all that mattered. If his friends wanted to die beside him, at least he would not face the end alone. "Grab him!" Lucas shouted. He and Amy reached Jake first, throwing his arms over their shoulders. Jake's legs could barely support him anymore. His body had pushed far beyond its limits. But he was still breathing, still conscious, still aware enough to mumble, "Get out." Velsha arrived and took position, firing back at pursuing devourers. "Move, now!" They ran, half-carrying Jake between them. The station shook constantly now. Lights flickered and went out. Whole sections of corridor collapsed behind them. The core was seconds from complete failure, and they were still too far from the shuttle. The pilot's voice came through their helmets, urgent and desperate. "The station is coming apart. I have to launch in 10 seconds or we all die. Do not leave," Velsha commanded. "We are coming." They burst out onto the landing platform. The shuttle's engines were already firing, ready for emergency launch. The rear door was still open, and other soldiers stood there waving them forward. 5 seconds. 4 seconds. Lucas and Amy threw Jake into the shuttle first, then dove in after him. Velsha followed, rolling through the door just as it started to close. The shuttle launched with such force that everyone was thrown to the floor. Behind them, the research station's core exploded in a flash of light that could be seen from orbit. The blast wave caught them, spinning the shuttle wildly. The pilot fought for control, engines screaming. For several terrifying seconds, they tumbled through space, and everyone thought they would die anyway after all that effort. Then the pilot managed to stabilize, and they were clear, accelerating away from the destruction toward the safety of the celestial dawn. Inside the shuttle, soldiers slowly got to their feet. Someone was crying. Someone else was laughing with relief. Amy and Lucas knelt beside Jake, checking his wounds. He was unconscious now, his body finally allowing itself to shut down after pushing so far beyond its breaking point. "Get a medic ready," Amy shouted into her helmet communication. "Commander Morrison is critical." The shuttle docked with the celestial dawn, and medical teams were waiting. They rushed Jake away immediately, surrounded by doctors and equipment. Amy and Lucas tried to follow, but the medical bay doors closed in their faces. All they could do was wait and hope. The rescued civilians were processed and taken to temporary quarters. They were checked for injuries, given food and water, and slowly helped to understand that they were truly safe. The Catharian youngling who held Jake's helmet refused to let it go, clutching it like a precious treasure even as adults tried to take it for cleaning. Admiral Gextel watched all of this from the command deck. He had monitored the entire mission, seen the helmet camera footage, watched Jake Morrison hold that corridor alone. He had witnessed something he had never seen in 300 years of military service. A warrior who fought not to destroy enemies but to protect innocents, who measured victory not in kills but in lives saved. 2 days passed before Jake was stable enough for visitors. He woke to find his small medical room filled with flowers and gifts from people he had never met. Cards in languages he could not read, drawings from the younglings he had saved. A bottle of expensive Catharian wine from officers who wanted to thank him, but did not know how else to express it. Amy and Lucas were there too, sleeping in chairs beside his bed. They had not left since he was brought in. When Jake tried to sit up, groaning at the pain, they both woke immediately. "Easy," Lucas said, helping him adjust his position. "You've got 3 broken ribs, a fractured arm, multiple lacerations, and enough bruises to paint a sunset. Take it slow." Jake looked around the room, confused by all the gifts. "What is all this?" "People want to say thank you," Amy explained. "The whole ship knows what you did. You're kind of famous now." Jake frowned, uncomfortable with attention. "I just did what needed to be done." "Anyone would have." "But not anyone did," a voice said from the doorway. Admiral Gextel entered, his massive frame filling the space. "You did, and 200 beings are alive because of it." The Admiral approached the bed, and behind him came someone Jake had not expected to see. Commander Velsha walked in slowly, her expression uncertain. She looked different somehow. Smaller maybe, less certain of herself. "I will leave you to talk," Gextel said, and departed with Amy and Lucas following. They gave Jake encouraging looks before the door closed, leaving him alone with Velsha. Silence stretched between them. Jake waited, saying nothing. He had learned the power of silence. Velcia struggled with it, opening her mouth several times before finally finding words. "I was wrong," she said simply. "About everything. About you. About humans. About what makes a warrior." Jake just watched her, his expression neutral. "I saw your tactics and called them barbaric," Velcia continued. "But I did not see the purpose behind them. You fight the way you do because you are willing to take damage that others cannot survive. You engage in close combat because it draws enemy focus away from those you protect. Every choice you make is designed to keep others safe at cost to yourself." She moved closer to the bed. "When I insulted you, I expected anger. I expected you to defend yourself with violence or at least with words. But you did neither. You walked away in silence. I did not understand that either. I thought it was weakness or shame. It was neither," Jake said quietly, his first words to her since the incident. "I know that now," Velcia replied. "You walked away because fighting me would have served no purpose. It would not have changed my mind. It would not have saved any lives. So you chose peace even though peace meant accepting insult. That took more strength than violence would have." She reached into her uniform and pulled out something she had been carrying. Jake's armor and insignia cleaned and repaired. His medals polished until they shone. She placed them on the table beside his bed with careful reverence. "The Admiral is convening a ceremony," she said. "The entire crew will be present. The rescued civilians will be there. And I will stand before everyone and apologize publicly for what I said. Then I will recommend you for the highest honor the Alliance can give." Jake looked at his armor but did not reach for it. "You don't need to do that." "Yes, I do," Velcia said firmly. "Not for you. For everyone else. So they understand that humans are not primitives or barbarians. So they see what I failed to see. That your species fights not because you love violence, but because you love everything else." She started to leave, then paused. "There's a youngling waiting outside. She has something she wishes to return to you." A moment later, the small Catharian child entered, still holding Jake's helmet. She walked to his bed slowly, shyly, and held it up to him with both hands. Jake took it gently, smiling at her. "You kept it safe," he said. "Thank you." The youngling nodded seriously. Then in a small voice she asked, "Are you going to fight again? Are you going to protect more people?" Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking about that question. He thought about the pain in his body, the exhaustion in his soul, the weight of all those names tattooed on his skin. He thought about walking away from the briefing room and the 3 days of silence that followed. Then he thought about this child standing before him, about the 50 younglings who went home to their families, about the 200 beings who would see another sunrise because someone stood in a corridor and refused to let evil pass. "Yes," he said simply. "That's what humans do." The ceremony was held 2 days later in the main assembly hall. Every member of the crew attended. Every rescued civilian was there. The humans stood together, proud and unified. Officers from every species wore their finest uniforms. Velcia stood at the center podium, and her voice carried to every corner of the room. She spoke of her mistake, her prejudice, her failure to understand what she was seeing. She spoke of Jake Morrison's courage, sacrifice, and the true meaning of being a warrior. She apologized not just to him, but to all of humanity for judging them without understanding them. Then she called Jake forward and presented him with the Star of Alliance Valor, the highest military honor that existed. The entire assembly applauded, the sound echoing like thunder. Jake accepted the medal with quiet dignity, uncomfortable with the attention but understanding its necessity. But then he did something unexpected. He removed the medal and walked to where the younglings stood with their families. He knelt before the small Catharian child who had held his helmet and pinned the medal to her shirt. "You were braver than me," he told her loud enough for everyone to hear. "You trusted that someone would come back for you. You had faith when everything was falling apart. That takes more courage than fighting ever will." The room fell silent. Then someone started clapping. Others joined. Soon,